I don't know if that was, I don't know if that ever anyone's aware of that, but
There we go. Is that better?
there you go.
You just want
All
to.
looking lovely tonight.
All right, stop. I have received no regrets for this evening. Can I have a motion on the table that the board of directors adopt the agenda as presented? Motion by Director Bodger and seconded by Director Corey. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, as I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Onwards to comments from the chair of the board and CGO. Hi, everybody. Hope you're all having a great evening. So we had a successful ownership linkage event in Brantford. It was very nice to go out there and meet the Brantford students and engage in trivia night. That was a really good time. Thank you to everybody who came out to it. Mileage strategy event will be coming out very soon. Should not take more than a few days, I assume. Other than that, I don't have anything else to report on my end. So we'll move onwards to the comments from the president and CEO.
Okay, thank you, Francesco. Sexy Week is underway. Happy Valentine's Day for those who celebrate. We've already gone underway with our sexy bingo and our drag shows, and we are having Bang and Brunch on the Waterloo campus. We're bringing that back tomorrow. On top of that, we are currently kind of ramping up the planning for Health and Wellness Month for March. So if you recall, back in November, we had our first Health and Wellness Month. That was kind of an idea built off of PJ's Mental Health Month that she had last March. So we're currently kind of organizing where our campus partners programming, where our programming kind of falls, so that we're not kind of creating conflicts in terms of scheduling. But things are looking good there. House Olympics promo is up. Back to the Sexy Week. We had a very successful Vengeance Van. I'm not sure event. It was basically a box where people could just break things. Seems like there's a major appetite for that because the line was very long. So that was a successful event. Yeah. House Olympics promo is up. Phil and I have signed off on everything to do with the 2-4 lounge. So now all we have to do is wait on that one. The new VP team has been hired. We have a new president, not only a new president now, but also a new VP team, which is very exciting. I think next year's team is going to be as strong, if not stronger than my team, which is obviously very high praise because I think we're doing a pretty bang up job this year. With that, we're also working on budgets, which are due for my team on the 24th as they come to the board shortly after that. I've currently assigned a volunteer empowerment project to my VP on the Brantford campus, just so we can get a better understanding of how to engage our volunteers in a way where they understand the opportunities and the potential they have with some of our opportunities, just so we can kind of increase our engagement and allow them to be a little bit more independent and autonomous and self-functional, if that makes sense, for next year. And then the big one is a really exciting event. To put it into perspective, last year at this time, we had roughly 100 volunteers signed up and registered for the following fall. So fast forward to this year, at the same point, we are at over 300 volunteers registered for the following fall, and we haven't even gotten promotions into residence hallways or down through the locust channels. So I find that to be extremely exciting, on top of the fact that I'm currently working on a project or a little bit of a brief that will kind of make the icebreaker hiring process a little bit more engaging throughout the entire year. Because one thing that kind of bothered me was this idea that if a first year really likes what the icebreakers are doing and sees themselves in that role, they're essentially told like if they were to go ask a breaker like, hey, I want to do what you do next year, a breaker would essentially have to tell them, okay, you got to wait 5 months to do anything about that, which always kind of rubs me the wrong way. I obviously want to see volunteers get in the door as fast as possible. So anything we can do to reduce that timeline, I'm for. So I'm currently working on something that will be more intentional in terms of how we can get icebreakers in the door, because for lack of the way I put it is I think icebreaking is a gateway drug into the rest of the students union. So yeah, that's those are my updates.
Great, thank you, Shane. So are there any questions or comments for president and CEO? Director Baruchid?
We can't hear you. Muted, Bo.
That up, so it's not completely 100%. So that's why. Okay, quick question. Any chances of bringing the destruction van down to Brantford? I know a couple of people who could benefit from that, me included.
Sorry.
Yeah, obviously I won't rule anything out. It does feel like something that if it could fit into a health and wellness type thing, you know, a little bit of a stress reliever. So yeah, I wouldn't rule anything out, but obviously I think stuff like that gets scheduled far in advance, and I'm not entirely sure how much advance we need for that, but that's something I'll definitely bring up with our VP on the Brantford campus. Perfect. Follow-up question, something a little different. Where do you, in terms of budgets and whatnot, what are some of the things that your VPs plan to bring to the board in terms of new expenditures, new projects that they think that would go well for next year? And when does the finance committee, and this is a question I guess now to Frankie, but when does the finance committee convene so that we can take those recommendations and evaluate them? So could I just get you to repeat the question for that I'm supposed to answer? Yes, your question is what are some of the projects or ideas, expenditures that some of your VPs are bringing, are thinking of bringing to the board and to you and then the board? Just would like to start thinking about those types of ideas. Yeah, so in terms of what my VPs plan on doing, that's something I provide them with a fair amount of autonomy on. Obviously, we have ideas over the course of the year that pertain to money. So in terms of planning for next year, we have had conversations, but again, that's something I provide them with a lot of autonomy to come up with themselves. With respect to my budget, there are some conversations about things that I want to move out of my budget and into VP budget lines. So things like one of the prime example for me is like the idea of the rally against gendered and sexual violence. Fortunately, I believe the president-elect she seems like she wants to again kind of make that a goal for her. But in the event there wasn't the president-elect didn't want to do that, it would be my intention to move that into a budget line where that could kind of live in permanence rather than on a presidential annual whim. So stuff like that is stuff I'm trying to navigate how to move out of my budget and where that stuff can live moving forward. Brilliant. Thank you. That's a very great idea.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, as I see none, we'll move onwards to comments from the executive director and COO.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to what Shane's already kind of put forward. I've been pretty intently over the last couple of weeks focused on a singular topic, which we will be addressing in camera. So happy to kind of update you once we're in that space. But largely, other than that particular topic, largely working with Spenny to kind of get her on board and ready to go with her team. Really excited to meet her team in person tomorrow morning, possibly noon, to say welcome and get them trained up for hiring their AVPs. So really excited to kind of start to transition. And yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
At the last board meeting, Phil, I know you talked about some sort of support that we're offering the Laurier Athletics department.
Correct.
Could you elaborate a little more on what that is?
Unfortunately, not at this time because that agreement hasn't actually been signed.
Okay.
But ultimately, what we're trying to do is recognize that the economic reality of Laurier for the next little while is going to be what it's going to be. And so we want to ensure that everything within the student affairs realm tries to maintain as much of the integrity as possible so that the Laurier student experience doesn't drop off. And that includes kind of supporting athletics. So happy to kind of give those details once we have are at the point where we can present this and then ultimately get the board's approval to sign it. Getting it to that finish line is proving to be a little bit more challenging than we would have anticipated, but we're actually really excited about all that work. So I will once we can. Until then, unfortunately, I can't really. It would just be rumor and hearsay at that point.
Okay, thank you. Apologies.
Okay, so any further questions or comments? Okay, as I see none, we'll move onwards to the adoption of the consent agenda. So this includes the monitoring reports for executive limitations, the BMD monitoring reports, and the not-for-profit corporation's constitutional amendments. So before I go into voting, does anybody have any concerns or questions or comments about any of these documents?
So what I might suggest, so I see that there's a question, but if you get a motion, a seconder, then it goes into discussion, then you guys can just vote on it once the questions are answered.
Okay, sure.
Makes sense?
So can I have a motion on the table to adopt the consent agenda as presented? Motion by Director Burchard, second by Vice Chair Phillips. Would you like to speak to your motions? And any discussion on the matter? Director Corey.
Sorry, just something I came across while looking at GP 2J. So my reading of it is that the quorum for the election is now 10% and the annual meeting is 50 people flat. Is that right? Or
So I can answer that. So that is correct. So basically, in order for the organization to become compliant with the new ONCA legislation for not-for-profit organizations, the lawyers recommended that we kind of change things up. So the 10% quorum for elections, that's exactly the same. And that process will be exactly as it has been. The new addition is the new quote unquote annual general meeting for approval of the results. So ultimately those people in that room would be, for all intents and purposes, ratifying those results and making them official to make us compliant with that new legislation.
Ian?
Yeah, just to further clarify, so that only applies for the board of directors. So the elections process for president remains the same. We still are facilitating the election for Senate and Board of Governors, the same with the 10%. The board of directors candidates for those 12 positions are selected through that same election process at the annual meeting. The mechanism that we have to do is we have to vote in those 12 board of directors. So you're essentially holding two elections for the board, just by the nature of the way our organization is structured. In other not-for-profit organizations, they would likely hire the directors, and then at the annual meeting, they would vote in the directors that they've vetted through the hiring process, interview process, whatever it may be. In our circumstances, we're essentially holding our main election, and then at the annual meeting, it's getting the technical process tidied up, which is why, again, with the advice of our legal opinion, we changed the quorum for the annual meeting, because all we need to do to become compliant is to vote in those 12 candidates. We appoint our auditor during the annual meeting, and then we would just proceed with any other business that arises. But it's basically taking our existing process and tacking on this specific annual meeting function so that we can be compliant with the new legislation.
okay, awesome. And a quick follow-up on that was just, I noted that there was a change in the method of the votes being tallied from transferable to instant runoff. And I just wanted to follow up on what exactly that would entail.
So it's not a change. Anything that's used single transferable will be using single transferable. It's just that the only ones that are essentially the changes that we're going to be looking at in the policy manual are is what everything kind of shifted to. So we use a few different voting methods. All of those have remained the same, so there's no change. It's just how they're happening, or what the oversight body is slightly changing, because it's not we're not using that election as our de facto annual meeting anymore. We're just running that election in-house.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Director Boucher.
So essentially going forward, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. I fixed it. So the question going forward is essentially we're going to have an election and then we're going to have an annual general meeting instead of having essentially both at the same time like it is now.
Yeah, so we can probably table some of these questions until we get to the policy manual amendment, because that's where this particular process is going to be enacted into the policy manual, where the board has direct oversight. Essentially, we took everything that was legislatively required, passed it by the membership, and amended our bylaw so that we're compliant there. We've taken kind of the process that makes the most sense for us organizationally and shifted it to be fully articulated in the policy manual so that it can be monitored for compliance, all that sort of thing. But those changes which are for the board to decide are in the policy manual. Agenda item, essentially the Not-for-Profit Corporations Act amendments are in the consent agenda because it's essentially just a report of the fact that we administered those changes to the actual document as we were able to do following the successful referendum. So that's just to show you as the board that organizationally we've executed that administrative task. Those changes have now been reflected. Francesco and Blake will sign it. And then the actual kind of process changes we'll be dealing with now in the policy manual.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, as I see none, we can move into voting. All those in favor for the motion to adopt these monitoring reports? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes 7-0. Onwards to direct inspection committee elections. So if we all go down to page 22, we could see the first one that we'll be doing, which is the M. So do I have any nominations for this direct inspection committee? Vice Chair?
I nominate myself and I will stand.
Okay. Any further nominations? Director Boucher.
I'll nominate Director Corey.
Director Corey, do you stand?
First time doing that in a while. I will.
Okay. And one more, any further nominations?
He beat me to it, but I will nominate Director Abu Rashid.
Director Boucher, do you stand?
Sure.
Okay. Are there any further nominations? Okay, so I see none, we can move into voting. All those in favor of, sorry, can I have a motion on the table to approve, to acclaim directors, Vice Chair Phillips, Director Corey, and Director Boucher to the EL2M Direct Inspection Committee. Motion by Director Leclerc and seconded by Director Murphy. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes 4-0-3. Okay, the next one we have is GP2H. Do we have any nominations for this direct inspection committee? Vice Chair?
I nominate Director Leclerc.
Director Leclerc, do you stand? Sure. I would like to nominate Director Laparchola. Director Laparchola, do you stand?
I do.
Yeah, we need one more. So any further nominations?
I would like to nominate Director Phillips or Vice Chair Phillips.
Vice Chair Phillips, do you stand?
I do not.
All right, Vice Chair Phillips,
I'd like to nominate Director Murphy.
Director Murphy, do you stand?
I do not, but I would like to nominate Director Bottinger.
Director Bottinger, do you stand?
Sure, yeah.
Awesome, okay. So can I have a motion on the table to have a motion on the table to acclaim Directors Leclerc, Director Laparchola, and Director Bottinger to the Direct Inspection Committee, GP2H. Motion by Vice Chair Phillips, seconded by Director Burchid. Would you like to speak to your motions?
Have fun.
Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move to voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, so the motion passes 6-0 to 3. Onwards to BMD 2D1. Do I have any nominations for this committee? Director Burchid.
I'd like to nominate myself and I'll stand.
Okay. Director Court.
I would also like to nominate myself, and I will also stand.
Okay. And one more, any further nominations? Vice Chair.
I'd like to nominate Director Betteview.
Director Batavia, do you stand? Okay, he may be away from his computer momentarily, but in the meantime, do we have any further nominations? Director Burchid.
Oh, I would like to nominate the vice chair.
Vice Chair Phillips, do you stand?
I do not.
Okay, I would like to nominate Director Laparchola. Director Laparchola, do you stand?
I do not.
Okay. Director Leclerc.
I'd like to nominate myself and I do stand.
Okay, any further nominations? Okay, as I see none, we'll move into, can I have a motion on the table to acclaim Directors Burchid, Corey, and Leclerc to BMD 2D1 Direct Inspection Committee. Motion by Director Murphy and seconded by Vice Chair Phillips. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, so the motion passes 5-0 to 4. Moving onwards to the protocol agreement of non-tuition fees. So I'll turn the mic over to Phil.
Yeah, I don't, what are we talking about? The protocol agreements?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna defer that to Ian since he's the resident expert on all things non-tuition.
Sure. So Ian, you can go ahead.
Yes, so this is coming to the board for information purposes. This is the tripartite agreement that we have between the university, the Graduate Student Association, and the Students' Union. It is a agreement that is directed by the Ontario Ministry of Colleges and Universities and essentially sets up oversight capabilities for non-tuition ancillary fees, so compulsory ancillary fees that you all pay. Essentially, there is we are coming to the end of our agreement. So we have a new agreement that essentially replicates the existing terms. There are no substantive changes. As you'll notice in the track changes, there's generally some fairly minor updates. We are not currently operating with a new tuition fee framework. So that is what the government of Ontario provides to universities to provide guidelines on how much tuition can be increased and also what rules may be in place for ancillary fees. So we're essentially operating with the status quo from last year. So we have an agreement that's shorter in length this year to give us the ability, if we need to return to it if there are fairly dramatic changes. We're not anticipating anything along those lines. So this is essentially just re-upping a standard agreement, which provides us with a good forum for making sure students aren't being charged fees unnecessarily, and that the fees that come into place do so according to those government directives. So that's in a nutshell. I can go into further depth if people have specific questions, but essentially it's a pretty straightforward, if complex sounding piece of work that we do.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Director Boucher?
Quick question. Was there any, was it like more of a formality, just, the two parties agreed that not much we can do, might be changed in the future, let's make it shorter to be flexibility? Was there any sort of actual negotiation? Could the student union have done anything to improve its position? Essentially is what I'm getting to.
So we are essentially in a status quo situation. As you mentioned kind of off the top, we had done I would say a more thorough revision 5 years ago when this particular agreement was renewed. So that process had addressed some concerns that we had. So there was nothing pressing that we were looking to change, but also recognizing that if the directive from the Ministry of College and Universities does change significantly, it's going to be in all parties' best interest to come back to the table and renegotiate, and the agreement allows for that situation. So we felt pretty comfortable just kind of re-upping that and then seeing where things land within the tuition fee framework when and if that becomes available.
Perfect. Any further questions or comments for Ian? Okay, as I see none, is this something that has to be approved, or is it just for information purposes only?
Just for information purposes.
Okay. So we can move onwards to the policy manual amendments. So I'll turn the mic over to Director Muller.
Yes, I will share. Okay, so we got into this a little bit off the start. So essentially, because of the requirements of the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, we've had to make some decisions to kind of ensure that we are being compliant with that. Included a bunch of fairly routine administrative changes, which we made through referendum. The big kind of main issue that we were faced with was this idea that we were generally taking the presidential election and saying that that was our annual meeting. And while there was some ways in which you could justify that, and there were circumstances that we felt like that potentially could be justified, essentially with the new legislation coming in, it provided an important time to kind of reevaluate and make some changes to make that process a little bit more straightforward and leave less room for interpretation, and be confident that if there was ever a question that it wouldn't be an issue. So that's what we've done. So the brief kind of gives you a bit of an overview in terms of what the proposed changes are. Essentially, we'd be not changing anything substantively about how we currently run elections, but it's been better reflected in GP2J so that the board can monitor it on a regular basis. It can be more kind of accurately tracked within monitoring reports, as well as the idea of providing you a bit of a snapshot of what the new timeline would look like. So if we were thinking back to the election that we just went through, everything would have gone the same. However, before we did results, we would have held our very brief annual meeting where we would have revealed the results of the successful directors who hadn't already been acclaimed. And then someone would have needed to make a motion, just like we do here at the board meetings, to elect the 12 named directors to be the board of directors for the Students' Union for the 2023-2024 year. Again, you would need at least 50 people present in order for that to have met the quorum of the annual meeting. However, the new legislation does give us the ability to have people participate by both electronic and telephonic means. So we've included that in our constitutional changes because that gives us, again, the most flexibility to do this, as well as instead of having a referendum question for our auditors, we would again make a motion at our annual general meeting to have KPMG as the Students' Union's auditor, put that to a vote of people in attendance. If there was any other business as per the legislation, we could handle it. Otherwise, we'd kind of wrap that up pretty quickly and then proceed with results night as per usual. So this does give you both a track change version of what the new GP2J would look like, as well as a clean version. So as you can see, we've just altered the title to be elections and annual meetings. One of the changes that the ONC made is that it's no longer an annual general meeting, it's an annual meeting. Again, pretty minor, but that's the new lingo that we use. So as you'll see here, the GP now gives the board instructions. And again, the board instructs the chair and CGO, who would then instruct the CRO and governance coordinator in support of my role to carry out these things. So again, similar to how the elections run this year, but with more specific direction on the specific elections. So each of them are outlined now in GP2J in terms of the timeline. Again, this is exactly mirrors what was in the Constitution previously. The voting mechanisms are the same. So everything is the same. It is just noted in here. And then, like I mentioned, just a bit of tweaking in terms of what gets submitted by the chief returning officer for the annual meeting. So in addition to the results at the next available meeting, just like we did last meeting, you would also receive the minutes of our proper annual meeting now as per the ONCA. So happy to answer any questions, but it's essentially just taking what we are currently doing, providing that oversight for the board. It also gives the board a bit more freedom because there is the ability, you know, if future boards wanted to kind of tweak how we're running elections, they wouldn't have to take those changes to the membership. It would be a vote of the board.
Okay, thank you. Director Gershon, you can ask your question.
So quick question in regards to meeting quorum. What is the plan, or what is the theoretical plan now, to make sure that we hold 50? If I recall correctly, at elections night, there was, I would say, about 50 students, but do we have a strategy, you know, maybe like incentivizing free food or a draw or something to do that?
I mean, the part of the intentionality of having it right before results night is that you capture the people that are there for results night who just happen to find themselves at an annual meeting as a result of that. And then we would work out the mechanics in specific detail, but in a previous capacity with the Graduate Student Association, for example, we held an in-person annual meeting with a similar quorum requirement, and you go around and you just kind of log and have people sign in that they're in attendance with their name, student number. So we would do that type of process, and we would have it organized. One of the benefits now of having a governance coordinator is that some of those details would be a project that role would be figuring out well in advance of the annual meeting.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, I see none. Can I have a motion on the table to approve these policy manual amendments presented to us? Motion by Director Corey, seconded by Director Bottinger. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, as I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Now can I have a motion on the table that the board of directors proceed to an in-camera session? Motion by Director Claire, seconded by Director Murphy. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any,
Do we have to motion to also include our secretary and governance coordinator? And
And
Phil.
myself, Phil and Shane as officers are technically included. But yeah, if you could include Clarissa, Ava, and I, that'd be fantastic.
Okay, motion that we move into in-camera session with the board of directors, Ian, Clarissa, and Ava.
I'll second that.
okay, so motion by Vice Chair Phillips, seconded by Director Boucher. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And then the abstentions. Okay, as I see none, the motion passes, unanimous consent.